Here's JimBob to make a straw man argument against atheists.
When you ask an atheist, why is it they don't believe in God? One of the most common responses is, I don't see any good evidence.
The reason I don't believe in God is because I don't understand what God is or what it means to say that he exists.
In this video, I'm going to explain why the atheist thinks this is a good reason and why it's in fact not a good reason. Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism. I'm JimBob. I'm here to give you the goods. So when an atheist says, I don't believe in God because I don't see any good evidence, what they mean is they don't see physical evidence.
That's not what I mean when I say that. Not only do I not see physical evidence, I don't see any way to conclude that God exists a priori either. I see no empirical reason to believe, nor do I see any rational basis or even any subjective intuition that God exists.
Now I wonder, are there any underlying assumptions being made in regards to what evidence is? Well, let's take a look. One obvious assumption the atheist makes is that all truth claims are empirical claims, which is a false starting assumption.
And it's not an assumption I'm making. In addition to empirical claims, there are also a priori claims and claims about subjective experience, like claims about what emotions one is experiencing, for example. I see no evidence of God that falls into any of these categories.
Not all truth is obtained in the same way. If there are different ways of arriving at the truth of different types of claims, and God's existence isn't the empirical category, then we've already spotted a category error.
I specified several epistemic categories, all of which are devoid of evidence for God.
The atheist also assumes that a standard for sufficient evidence has been established. Is there only one type of evidence? No. But in this case, empirical evidence is the standard they are going with. So let's see if they apply the empirical standard to their own beliefs. Is there anything the atheist believes or assumes without empirical evidence? Does the atheist believe in knowledge? Yes.
No, I don't believe in knowledge, at least not in the way I suspect you would define knowledge. The closest I think we can get to knowledge is finding ideas that seem to consistently, falsifiably, and most parsimoniously predict experience. However, if all of our experiences are just a big illusion or delusion, then I doubt you would count that as knowledge, and I don't see how we can be sure that all of our experiences are not just one big illusion or delusion.
Is there any evidence? No. Does the atheist believe that the regularity in nature will maintain tomorrow? Is there any evidence? No.
There is evidence, there just isn't proof. The problem of induction is simply that observed regularities can't prove future regularities. But for as long as inferring the future from our memories and records of the past continues to seem to work, then we will benefit from doing so, thus justifying said inferences.
How about the laws of logic? Is there any physical, empirical evidence for the law of identity?
Yes, the fact that literally everything you see is what it is and is not what it isn't is empirical physical evidence for the law of identity. It's not proof, but it is evidence. However, you don't need empirical evidence for the laws of logic because they can be deduced a priori. The existence of God can't be inferred a priori or a posteriori. It can't be deduced rationally without evidence, nor can it be inferred from empirical evidence.
Does the atheist believe in concepts or universal categories, meaning? These are all examples of things the atheist does in fact believe in. They exist in a particular way, but they are not empirically verified.
I'm not sure what you mean by meaning, and I already said that I don't believe in knowledge. Information is simply non-randomness, which can, in fact, be empirically observed. Concepts are ways of speaking about things, and obviously speaking is empirically observable. The mind is an activity carried out by the brain, and you can see the empirical consequences of that activity in people's behavior. That's empirical evidence. However, concepts in one's own mind can also be known subjectively, like emotions can. God cannot, unless you think God only exists as a subjective experience or brain activity like minds and emotions.
So I think we have enough examples to demonstrate the atheist doesn't really apply their empirical standard to their own beliefs, but they certainly love to use it against Christianity. Now, of course, the atheist will say, well, those aren't my beliefs, those are just my axioms.
Now I'm curious about what this guy thinks an axiom is. Thoughts, minds, and concepts are not axioms.
Okay, then my axiom is God exists.
Are you trying to convince atheists that a God exists or not? Because simply stating that he exists axiomatically is not a very convincing argument.
To further demonstrate the flaw in their empirical standard, What if we use their argument against God's existence against some of the things they believe and see how it sounds? I don't believe in truth. There's no empirical evidence.
What exactly would it mean to believe in truth? Truth is not a claim. Maybe he means that believing in truth is believing in the correspondence between ideas and reality. If that's what he means by truth, then I'm not convinced that there is any such thing. Maybe our ideas about reality as it exists beyond our own minds are accurately depicting it, but I don't see how we could know that for sure.
I don't believe information exists because there's no physical evidence.
There actually is physical empirical evidence of information. Information is simply non-randomness. An example I often use is that when a rock falls into some mud, the shape of the indentation it leaves is not random, it's determined by the shape of the rock. The shape of the indentation is thus information about the shape of the rock that formed it. That is physical, empirically observable information.
I don't think knowledge exists because I can't see, taste, or touch it.
I'm not convinced knowledge exists, but not because I can't empirically observe it. I don't believe it exists because I don't see how it can be acquired.
Where it leads to is absurdity. So it seems as though any argument the atheist levies against God's existence based on the physical evidence standard could be made against things like truth itself.
I actually don't know whether truth exists, as I suspect this guy defines truth. Is he one of the presuppositional apologists who defines truth as being whatever God says? I definitely don't believe in truth if that's how you define it. Maybe he defines truth as correspondence between a claim and mind-independent reality. I don't know whether that kind of truth is possible or not. When I say something is true, I only mean that it consistently, falsifiably, and most parsimoniously agrees with experience. By experience, I don't just mean empirical observation, but also a priori deductions and subjective experiences.
The problem points to a larger issue with using mere sense data and empiricism as the foundation of truth. Another assumption we hear is the claim, science and empiricism is the best way to truth.
Science and empiricism is redundant. Empiricism is already a part of science, but it's not all of science, because if it were, math could not be a science.
Well, is that a truth claim? If it were true that science and empiricism is the best way to truth, shouldn't it be verified through the scientific method? Are you seeing the issue, atheists?
No, because the efficacy of science relative to other approaches can actually be tested scientifically. If, for example, astrology were a more reliable means of predicting the weather than meteorology, that could be scientifically demonstrated. That could be empirically tested and corroborated.
Science and empiricism ironically rely wholly on immaterial concepts and assumptions that cannot be verified with those methods.
If that were the case, then it would not, in fact, be possible to test whether science or astrology were better at predicting the weather.
When it comes down to it, all knowledge is faith-based. There, I said it. The icky word, faith. Faith in the atheist view is belief without evidence, plain and simple.
I suspect that this guy might be one of those apologists who wants us to conflate faith with inductive inference. Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as assurance of what you do not see. It is belief without evidence. Even if you don't believe that empiricism is reliable or has a valid foundation, an inference based on observation is, by definition, not faith-based.
In the Christian view, the fact that everyone has faith is the evidence of things unseen, whether it's immaterial things like logic or truth or the notion of the past or the future or mind. There's no escaping a faith-based starting point.
Memories are evidence of the past, and we directly experience our own minds and can see evidence of other minds in the behavior of others. Inferring their existence from these experiences is not faith.
And the act of denying a faith-based starting point would require, faith in things without evidence.
No, it would simply require understanding what evidence is. There is empirical evidence for many of the things you insist are not empirically observable, like information, and you seem to think that atheists don't count a priori deductions and subjective experiences as evidence, which is not the case for me, and I doubt it's the case for many atheists.
You see, the atheist puts faith in their reasoning. They put faith in their senses.
Faith in your senses is a contradiction in terms. To base a belief on what you empirically observe is, by the biblical definition, the opposite of faith, regardless of whether your senses are reliable.
The atheist might say, there's a difference between faith and confidence. I have confidence. Confidence relies on faith in other things, like the regularity of nature, your own reasoning, reliability, which assumes a past, present, and future. There is no view that is wholly derived from evidence.
If a view is even partially derived from evidence, it is, by the biblical definition, not faith. A view derived by a priori deduction is not faith. A view about subjective experience that is derived from actually having that experience is also not faith.
Therefore, the basis for truth is not empirical. If you don't believe me, just check the comments section of this video.
The basis for truth, as I use the word truth, is consistency with experience, regardless of whether that experience is illusory. That's not faith.
For any opposing comment to this video, take note of the non-empirical, immaterial things they include in their comment.
That would be a real gotcha if I ever claimed a priori inferences and subjective experiences were not valid bases for belief in certain claims.
Ask them for evidence of those things. In conclusion, if the question of God's existence is not an empirical question, and both the atheist and the Christian accept the existence of things that are empirically not verified, then who has a better account or explanation for the existence of truth or knowledge, the atheist or the Christian? It seems to me that the atheist takes freely a whole category of mind-dependent things that cannot be verified through empiricism.
I don't believe that knowledge exists, and I'm not convinced that truth, as you define it, is possible. Some of those things can actually be corroborated through empiricism, and others can be directly subjectively experienced or deduced a priori. The existence of God can't be established in any of those ways. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.